There were four main reasons I was looking for an upgraded head unit: to have modern navigation, a backup camera, Apple CarPlay, and to be able to charge my phone. So I picked out a head unit that I liked, and I thought it was going to be as easy as connecting it to the speaker wire in the dash, and I'd be all set to go. To actually remove the radio, you first need to remove the vents above. It's easier once it's already out. You can see there's two metal tabs above that you have to get a screwdriver and to pry down, and then two small plastic clips on the bottom as well. Once you depress those, you're able to slide it out. The radio is even easier. There's simply two screws to remove, and then it pulls right out and you can disconnect the harness. I got the head unit all wired up, it powered on, and no sound. I spent probably about an hour talking to Crutchfield on the phone. They're super helpful, and I ultimately figured out that I actually have an amp in the trunk. So this goes along with the hi-fi audio system, and there's really no way of placing a head unit without getting a new amplifier. So I drilled 4 holes into the previous mounting spot of the amp, and these line up with the new amp, and I just put in some hex bolts to keep it in place for easier removal. The next step is actually wiring up the amp. So I cut away the previous amp, trimmed the harness after about 3 inches, just in case for some reason I ever did want to go back. The previous amp is even easier to remove. It's basically just held in by that piece of Velcro on the bottom, and then you disconnect the harness by basically pulling down on this tab that lets it come right out. In addition to the speaker wires, it's also supplied by power from a wire coming in from the right side, this thicker red one that goes all the way back to the battery. And there's also a ground wire in the harness, that's the thick brown one here, that then ties into a common ground. So to power up the new amp, I actually installed a new 8-gauge wire from Crutchfield that has its own fuse here, and then connected in with the harness that was supplied by the amp from JBL. The previous wire for the amp connected into a fuse and this fuse box, and I basically just removed it at the source here and trimmed it back. As for the actual wiring of the amp, I was able to find this diagram online that goes through and lists all the positive and negative terminals for each one of the 10 speakers that's inside the car. So this is the setup that I ultimately ended up with using the different channels. So this is the harness that comes with the amplifier. For each channel, they're color-coded, and there's a black strand to indicate which one is the negative and positive for each one of the terminals. The wires from the speakers actually come twisted in pairs, which makes it a whole lot easier, and you just have to spread them apart. So for this, I ended up using butt connectors that have built-in heat shrink as well, and would kind of do a few at a time. I know there's some people who will probably say soldering is the only way to do this. The other component that makes this much trickier is you're basically leaning across the bumper and into the trunk to try and do this, so it's a bit of an awkward angle to try and do it. The other benefit is when you're working in 30-degree temperatures, the heat gun is nice to heat up your hands. This is also my first project with significant car stereo work, so I also made some mistakes, and these are much easier to cut out. I also got cramped after a while and discovered you can sit in the trunk to do this work as well. Wiring the head unit at the front of the car was a whole lot easier. This is the connector that plugs into the back of the radio that you disconnect, and the only wires that you actually need from this are a constant 12-volt ground, and then an on when just the car is turned on, and then these connect into the harness from the Alpine head unit. The only other wire that I'll ultimately have to hook up to is the signal to tell the amplifier to turn on when the radio is turned on as well, which I have hooked up here. The other harness that comes with the Alpine head unit basically has the connectors for the 3 RCA cables that go back to the amplifier. They're all individually labeled. This is also where the backup camera ties in. So all the RCA cables are identical, so I ended up putting on zip ties that had slightly different lettering on them so I could remember which one's which when they all ended up in the trunk. And I was looking for something more permanent than just marker in case it got wiped off. Once everything is wired up, the center console trim goes back in easily. There's actually a lot of room along the passenger side to run the cables. I did take a break after I had wired up the first 2 speakers to check them just to make sure that they actually worked. and I was quite relieved when they actually turned on. This is the software that comes with the JBL amplifier. It's very intuitive to use and lets you select the location, type of speaker for all the various channels. I was able to turn them on and off individually to making sure that they were all working well together. Overall, this probably took me about 10 hours to do, but in the end, I think it was worth it. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments, and I appreciate you guys watching.